introduce
This meeting is being
the
recorded.
webinar for us.
Thanks, Jamie, and welcome everyone to this webinar. So those that don't know me, my name is Adam Blaze. I am the Chief Executive at Activity Alliance. Annual Disability and Activity Survey is one of the main things we do. It's one of the work that I'm the most proud of. So hopefully we're going to be able to impart a lot of information, useful information on you during this session. In terms of how this works, I'm just going to cover a couple of bits of housekeeping and accessibility information. We do have captions available during this session. As you may have seen, the webinar is being recorded, so we've made sure everyone's cameras and audio, apart from those that are speaking, are going to be off. The BSL we're going to add to the video once the recording is completed. And as Jamie mentioned, you may have mentioned before you joined, we might have already heard this, but we do have the Q&A function. We're not going to answer the questions during the webinar, but if there's any questions that aren't picked up at any point during the webinar, we'll make sure we get the answers out to everyone or to those people that ask specific questions. So please use that function. And then in terms of what we're going to cover today, let me just take you through some of the things that we're looking to cover. So we're going to present the research findings. We're going to take you through some of those headlines, let you know what the current state of play looks like. There'll be a chance for you to listen and follow a discussion with disabled people about their lived experience of sport and activity. So that's definitely something that I'm really looking forward to. And it's a really important point to emphasize that lived experience absolutely shapes this survey and the work that we're doing. And then we're also going to present to you some of the findings, have a discussion about that, and conclude with recommendations coming out of this year's survey. And you'll be pleased to know that I'm going to hand over to one of our experts, so you don't have to listen to me anymore. So I'm going to pass over to Molly, who's been integral to this work. Thank you.
Thanks, Adam. Yes, I'm Molly O'Brien. I'm a Senior Research and Insight Advisor here at Activity Alliance. I've been leading on the research on our annual survey this year. So in a moment, I'm going to share an overview of the research findings with you. I've prepared this as a pre-recorded presentation, partly because we find this a really effective way of communicating research, but also because it meets my access needs as a disabled person myself. I will say the recording is a little bit quieter, so you may need to turn the volume up a little bit to your side, but hopefully it will be clear for you. So if we go to the recording on the next slide, please.
The Annual Disability and Activity Survey tracks disabled people's experiences and perceptions in sport and activity over time since 2019. This year's research findings focus on 5 themes. 1. Participation and inclusion. 2. Health, well-being and social connection. 3. Cost and access. 4. Representation, belonging and involvement. And 5. Accessible spaces. I'm now going to give you an overview of the key findings for each theme. Starting with participation and inclusion. So we know from Sport England's Active Lives adult data that disabled people are twice as likely to be inactive compared to non-disabled people. That's around 39% compared to 19%. Our research showed that disabled people are less likely to have the opportunity to be active. That's 52% compared to 74% of non-disabled people. And disabled people are more likely to want to be more active. So that's 67% compared to 54% of non-disabled people. Positively though, this gap between disabled and non-disabled people's experiences is narrowing compared to previous years of the data, as there have been some positive changes in disabled people's responses. However, for this year's finding, the important issue was that disabled people are experiencing a lack of inclusive activities in practice, despite many sport and activity organisations saying that they are inclusive. Inclusion very much depends upon flexibility and adaptability, with inclusion depending upon staff training, confidence and willingness to adapt and be flexible in activity delivery, as much as the accessibility of facilities and equipment and overcoming many of the practical and environmental barriers that disabled people experience. Also, experience of fluctuating health conditions, non-visible impairment and multiple impairment affect access to activities and how inclusive activities are for these people experiencing these conditions. Next is health, well-being and social connection. Consistent with previous years of the research, the top reasons why disabled people take part in sport and activity and the top types of support to be active are related to physical health and mental well-being benefits. This year's findings show the worsening well-being for disabled people, with increases in anxiety. Moving on to cost and access. So this refers to the cost of activities themselves, but also to wider costs to activities, including travel, equipment, clothing, support, and the impact of benefits. This year's findings show that disabled people are now being more negatively impacted by the increased cost of living, with disabled people being more likely to say that the increased cost of living has reduced how active they are. That's 46% compared to 39% of non-disabled people. This is a negative change for disabled people, as in previous years, disabled and non-disabled people responded similarly, and this is now returning to the difference seen in 2022. 6 in 10 disabled people say the cost of activities influences how they choose to be active, so that's 59% compared to 53% of non-disabled people. Again, this is a negative change for disabled people with an increase in this statistic. There was discussion of the importance of a flexible approach to cost of activities with access to discounts and concessions. However, some disabled people described having to explain, justify or prove themselves disabled to access financial support and concessions, with this being quite emotionally draining and demanding, and some describing this as off-putting and stigmatising. The final point on this slide here relates to the activity trap, so the fear of benefit being stopped due to being physically active, and this year's data is showing an increase in this fear, with 43% of disabled people saying that a fear that their benefits or financial assistance may be taken away prevents them from being more active, and 21% of disabled people say that they or someone else they know has had benefits or financial assistance reduced, sanctioned or stopped due to being physically active. This fear is returning to 2021 level, as in the intervening years there has been a positive change in disabled people's experiences. However, the data this year is showing an increase in the fear of the activity trap. Now, representation, belonging and involvement. New to the research this year, disabled people are less likely to feel that they belong in sport and activity. So that's 35% compared to 57% of non-disabled people. Belonging was described as feeling accepted without a sense of judgment or scrutiny and without having to explain or justify themselves. Disabled people are less likely to see themselves represented in participating, working and volunteering in sport and activity, and they're less likely to have the opportunity to be part of the workforce. As disabled people are less likely to have the opportunity to become a coach or take on a role in delivering sport and activity. That's 21% of disabled people compared to 27% of non-disabled people. And this is actually a positive increase compared to previous years of the data, when 9% of disabled people said so compared to 24% of non-disabled people. Disabled people emphasise the importance of activities being peer-led. So being led by disabled people and people with long-term health conditions that helps activity feel safer, helping people to feel more understood, feel supported and having a flexible approach. Examples given here were the value of volunteering at parkrun and disability-led sessions and groups. And the final point on this slide is about the importance of being consulted and involved, not just for the quality of activity provision itself, but also for reinforcing and creating a sense of ownership and belonging. Examples given were the value of gym inductions and one-to-one conversation before activities. These small adjustments that can make a big difference, enabling conversations about adjustment and adaptation to enable inclusive participation. And finally, accessible spaces. Data shows disabled people's preference to be active in the following spaces. First, outdoors. So that's 39% in green spaces, such as parks, woodland and the countryside, and 28% in blue spaces, such as lakes, rivers and the seaside. Second, at home, that's 31% online, and 25% not online. And third, indoors, at 28% at a leisure or sports centre, gym, studio or swimming pool. The research goes into more detail about the accessibility of these spaces, including challenges and positives. Disabled people describe choosing activity spaces not just on preference alone, but also on what felt more manageable for them, what felt predictable and what felt safe. Disabled people value choice, so having access to mainstream accessible activities and also disability-specific provision that are offered consistently rather than available only at limited sessions. And the last point on this slide relates to travel to accessible spaces for activity, with disabled people being more likely to spend longer travelling to activity spaces with complex journeys, including forms of travel, who they travel with, and the accessibility of travel affecting activity participation. For instance, new to the research this year is data on travel timing that shows disabled people are twice as likely to spend 1 to 2 hours travelling to activities and less likely to spend up to 15 minutes travelling to activities compared to non-disabled people. These experiences do vary by impairment, gender and age.
So that was an overview of the research findings. So we're going to bring this to life a little bit more with discussion with disabled people about their lived experience of sport and activity. I'm going to be handing over to Catherine Hall from True Insight in a moment. Catherine, where I work together on this research, and she's going to lead a discussion with 4 disabled people who took part in the research. We have Aldona, Heather, Thomas and Santana joining us today. But I will hand over to Catherine now for the discussion. Over to you.
Thank you, Molly. It's really useful and really, really fantastic to hear that summary of the research and how disabled people value being active and they often want to do more, but the barriers are often practical, environmental and systemic rather than just simply about motivation. So thank you for taking us through that. So what we'd like to do now is to bring it to life through the experience of 4 of our research participants. So we have Aldona, Heather, Thomas and Santana who have kindly agreed to talk about what has worked well for them, what still gets in the way and what people need to understand about accessing sport and activity in practice. So we'll just start with Aldona. Aldona, you have talked to us in the groups that we did and the discussions that we did, the research discussions. You talked about wanting to take part in wheelchair sport, but that you faced challenges around cost, equipment, travel and feeling welcomed. Could you just tell us, can you just bring that to life for us a little bit by telling us about your experiences and what those barriers look like in practice?
Sure. Hello, everyone. So I'm new to disability sports. I used to participate in county level tennis and distance running, but now I'm unable to do both of those things. But I'd like to continue to try and play tennis. My option is to continue in wheelchair tennis. I'd like to try and compete in it as well, but I've faced quite a few barriers trying to get into this. Firstly, the wheelchairs for tennis are tennis specific and they're incredibly expensive. They cost several £1,000s and there seems to be very little funding for them. So I haven't yet managed to even have a go at it. There are very few clubs that actually have a tennis wheelchair, and the ones that may have them are a very long way from where I live. Secondly, very disappointingly, although the Lawn Tennis Association claimed to be very supportive and inclusive of people with disabilities, they haven't been at all helpful. They haven't even replied to an email I sent a few months ago asking how I can get involved in wheelchair tennis. Also, the National Tennis Centre, I called them to ask if there are any wheelchair tennis sessions I could take part in. And I was told I would need to get my disability classified first before I could even go there for a session. And that obviously knocked my confidence quite a bit. The third problem I'm facing is that I've been advised I need to get my disability classified, and I've actually no idea how I'd go about this. And as my disability doesn't fit into any of the classical spinal cord injury, cerebral palsy, amputee categories, I'm worried that I'm not going to fit into any of these categories, as my disability is a bit unusual. So yeah, it's all been a bit of an uphill struggle, to be honest, and I'm still trying to find out how I can get into it, but yeah, it's hard.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that with us. And we talked about this in the group discussions, didn't we? Could you just, so thank you for kind of sharing that with us. Could you just say a little bit about what would help? What would be put into practice that would really make a big difference to you?
I think if there was an appointed person in each region for maybe each sport that people with disabilities could go to ask questions about equipment and where we could take part in these sports, that would be really helpful, because I mean, tennis, for example, doesn't seem to have that. It's about feeling welcomed, as was mentioned in the initial research. There aren't many places that seem to be very welcoming. I think it would also be helpful if each county or region had a depot of equipment that clubs could tap into. So, for example, each region would have some wheelchair tennis chairs people could use.
Okay. They're brilliant suggestions, thank you. And it is, like you say, it's about creating that sense of belonging. So it's these practical things, and also having a go-to to get what you need or to get advice and so on. That's really helpful to hear. Thank you. Is there anything else that you'd like to say before we ask Heather about her experiences?
No, I just think it's been a lot harder than I expected. I thought people would be really welcoming, but there just doesn't seem to be the knowledge and the welcoming, which is disappointing.
Yeah, I can imagine. Thank you. Heather, you also shared a really good example that helped bring it all to life to us in the groups about speaking to a yoga instructor before a session and having small adaptations made. Could you tell us what happened and why that one-to-one conversation really mattered for you?
Yes, good morning, everyone. I have a hidden disability, which means that I often have to take initiative and explain my limitations to exercise sports providers. With regard to this example, I recall it was so important when I booked the 12-week yoga course. It was stated as being accessible to everyone. And I made sure I arrived 30 minutes early at the class to check this out. And I found that it wasn't accessible. And the instructor had a different interpretation of the word. But after a short conversation, we agreed that some of the yoga moves intended for actually advanced participants could be replaced by simple stretches to prevent burnout for me. This meant that I could complete the course at a level suited to my ability, and I didn't feel embarrassed or humiliated. It's really hit hard on me how important it is to always have this one-to-one for any exercise class now that I attend. And it's taught me that everyone is really learning in life, and that collaboration is really essential to achieve the best outcome for both the class and me as an individual.
Yeah, so again, it's this theme about creating a sense of belonging, giving you that space to reassure and build your confidence. So it sounds like you were able to get that in that instance.
Yes, I'm a lot safer now. The yoga class gave me a massive boost in confidence, and I had a bit of a light bulb moment in realising that I could be more proactive and actually convince the exercise providers. But it is extremely difficult because as a disabled person, whether it's physical, mental, emotional, whatever type of disability, it's hard to express your needs because they have no personal experience of your struggles in life. And I find you really do have to push yourself forward and remember that you are entitled to this support. And I would say you just don't have to relent. I did really enjoy the classes and made lots of connections. And most importantly, I found out that several disabled people were attending. And they, like me, had overcome their worst fears by bravely requesting the reasonable adjustments. I blended in with the group, we had coffee together, and I'd gone from wondering if I'd make a fool of myself with my energy levels low and my muscles unable to cope with vigorous stretching. But it turned out the complete opposite. I had a real sense of accomplishment. I found myself now saying to myself repeatedly when I fancy trying something new, never say never, Heather. And it just takes careful consideration and planning with the instructor to enable them firstly to understand and then accommodate what I need.
That's a really good example. Thank you, Heather. It really does show us how important it is to have that space, have that little bit of care and due diligence and understanding beforehand, and just have that conversation to learn a little bit about what you need to make sure that you can take part. That's lovely, thank you, and I'm glad that you had that experience. Thomas, could you, you've spoken about Pilates being a really positive experience for you. Could you tell us what makes that activity work well, particularly around, you talked about atmosphere, support from the physio and feeling included rather than judged?
Well, from my perspective, I'm a secondary progressive MS sufferer, and I see a physio regularly, and they recommended that I take up Pilates to try and manage some of the symptoms of my of the MS. So I went for initial assessment with a physio who takes the class, because it's a physio-led Pilates class, and explained that the class was tailored to individuals who are either muscularly sort of constrained or they have neurological impairments, and everybody was welcome. So the atmosphere from the get-go, as it was presented to me, was very sort of welcoming. It's a very warm, supportive environment, enables everybody to work at their own level, which is great. Everyone's there doing their best, and we're trying to maintain our own sort of level of physical and mental well-being, which really helps. The other great part of it as well is that the physio really offers support and help as well. And I think because she understands what disabled people go through, or people that have had some sort of setback, be it a car accident or some sort of workplace injury, she's sort of very well attuned to what we need. So she offers support there. There's a very clear unwritten rule that there's no negative commentary allowed within the class, and everyone's everyone's to be tolerated as everyone is working to the best of their abilities. So we're there doing our best. The physio is also open and available to feedback both before class and after class in terms of sort of feedback on how you feel you're progressing. And the great thing is there's a feeling of inclusion rather than judgment, not just from the physio who takes the class, but from everybody else as well. So it's there to support people and encourage people to be themselves in a safe space. And I think the key point to know is that everyone who's there wants to be there. And this is also reflected by the fact that we see the same people there week in, week out. And in actual fact, the class is fully booked up for the next 3 months. So from that perspective, it's obviously working. And the other thing that the tutor does as well is there's a WhatsApp group that allows us all to share sort of thoughts and feedback and experience on what works, what doesn't work, what we'd like to see more of, what we'd like to see less of. So it's a very inclusive sort of approach to doing an exercise class.
So again, there's the themes here, isn't there, about it's the people leading the activity that set the tone. It sounds like what's particularly good in this instance is they're not afraid of feedback. They take it on, they make changes, they adapt. That's a really good example, thank you. Anything that you'd like to add before I ask Santana about her experiences, Thomas?
key point, two things I would like to say is that having a disability or a physical impairment shouldn't stop people from enjoying exercise, and disabled people should be actively supported in this aim. And the key thing I take away from this is conversation with the physio is that allow everyone to do their best and to be their best without judging people. And I think that sort of feedback, attitude, environment makes a whole big difference to it all for me.
Lovely. Thank you, Thomas.
Thanks, Catherine.
Santana, you
Hi.
bring several perspectives. Hi. You bring several perspectives as someone who's experienced inaccessible places and as someone who actually also delivers accessible activities. So that was interesting to see those two sides, to hear those two perspectives. So could you tell us, in your opinion, what providers often miss and what they need to really think about to make activities genuinely accessible?
Okay, I'm going to read something now because I've had a migraine this morning. Just let me know if I miss anything. I think one of the biggest things providers miss is that access doesn't start at the door of the activity. It starts much earlier with whether someone can even get there, afford it, arrange care, whether it be a carer for themselves or childcare. Can the participants understand what to expect and can they feel safe enough to turn up? I've experienced this from both sides. As a disabled person, I know how quickly something that looks accessible, and the same word was used in Heather's class, and which was a yoga class for me. I turned up and the venue was upstairs. It might technically also have free step access, but there's no public transport nearby, no parking, no quiet spaces, unclear information, or the session is too expensive, then a lot of people are still excluded. I personally live in a very rural area, and even places like Suffolk, public transport can be limited, expensive, or not line up with class times or locations. If someone is disabled and on a low income, neurodivergent, chronically ill, doesn't drive, then just come along is not really an option. That's before we get into energy levels, anxiety, pain, fear of not fitting in. What providers often miss is that inclusion isn't just about ramps and policies, it's about the whole journey. Can people find the information easily? Do they know the cost? Are concessions available without shame? Can they contact someone beforehand? It's great to hear that there's WhatsApp groups, communication, and that ability to just reach out to a provider is really essential. Are there seated options? Can they rest? Is there anywhere that they can go and have maybe quiet time if things become overwhelming? I have found the inability to have a chair in a gym before and been told to rest on equipment. So I just think very, very basic needs are not being met on occasion, and there is so much more that can be done with a little bit of communication, even just between instructors like me, reaching out to other instructors. Did you know if you just made this little change, your class could become more accessible? And most of the time that's really well received, but it does take confidence to be out there doing those kind of things.
Yeah, that I think you raised a really important point, and that's really good to hear about the thinking bigger and leaders having to think about this, activity leaders, and open themselves up to giving support and thinking wider than just the immediate space. That's really, really good to hear and important to hear. Anything else that you'd like to add, Santana, about, perhaps if there's one thing that activity leaders need to think about from today, what is the main thing you want them to remember and keep in mind about building confidence and creating that sense of belonging and thinking bigger picture? If there is just one thing.
I think representation. I think representation is so important. I've heard so many times that people just find confidence in seeing that there's a disabled instructor out there. It means that they know that they can do it. And that sometimes that small message is all that's needed. Am I visually there on a poster? Is there anyone doing the class standing and seated? Be seen and see others doing and achieving.
Yeah, lovely.
Thank you.
That all is so important, isn't it, to creating that sense of belonging. Thank you.
Thank you.
So thank you to everybody for taking part in the research and also being willing to share your personal experiences. It's a big ask and we really appreciate you doing that for us today. To close this section, I would like to just kind of put a question to all four of you. If you could, so please feel free to chip in just the last couple of minutes before I hand over to Molly to move on to the next section. Could you just share one thing you most want people to just take away from today when it comes to understanding about your experience of accessing sport or activity? What's that one thing you want them to go away and remember? Who would like to go first?
I go. For me, genuine accessibility means people don't have to fight their way into a space before they've even started moving. The space already made room for them.
Lovely, thank you. Would anybody else like to say something?
Oh,
Donna.
yeah, I just like people to have a more positive attitude and don't say negative things when you want to have a go at a wheelchair sport or a disability sport, because it knocks your confidence. If someone says something negative, like you're going to have trouble maneuvering a chair, or so yeah, just try and be encouraging.
Thank you. Heather?
I think you've got to be brave and set out your expectations early on and be convinced that you can influence change because you deserve it. The mindset that you have to go to the class with, and especially in advance of the class, making that initial contact.
Okay, thank you for that. If there are no other thoughts that you'd like to add, I will just say big, huge thank you to you for taking part. And it's so important that we not only, we don't just rely on people reading the report, but we help bring the research findings to life. We bring some of our participants here to verbalise and share kind of what they contributed to the research and really kind of bring it to life for us. We've heard what can make activity feel supportive and inclusive, about what creates that feeling of belonging, to help overcome some of the practical barriers, some of the emotional barriers. There's also the barriers that are very practical around access, cost, equipment, confidence and consistency, but confidence seems to be the big thing. And that sense of belonging comes through consistently across all themes. I'm going to hand back to Molly now to introduce the recommendations, and then we'll come back to the group to discuss those recommendations and what they mean in practice.
Thanks, Catherine. Yeah, we should be going back to our slides now. So thank you to everybody so far. I certainly found that very interesting and valuable to hear from. So yes, recommendations. We're moving on to the next section of our webinar now. So the research ends with 4 concluding recommendations, and these recommendations are grounded in the data and the insight and disabled people's lived experience. So to be inclusive and to meet disabled people's needs, the sport and activity sector needs to focus on the following 4 areas. We've got 1, ensure inclusive practice. 2, be affordable and flexible. 3, create a culture of belonging, and then 4, ensure disabled people have choice. The research report does go into much more detail and explanation about each of these 4 recommendations, and you can find out more about that there. But for now, I am going to hand back again to Catherine and to our participants, because I feel it's important that we hear from them as to which one of these recommendations are most important to them, and to what difference that these recommendations will make for their experience of accessing sport and activity. Now I'll hand back to Catherine and to our participants again.
Thanks, Molly, for summarising those recommendations beautifully. Let's go back to Aldona, Heather, Thomas and Santana. Just for the next 10 minutes or so, I'd like for you 4 to think about your own experiences and which of these recommendations feels most important to you specifically, and what difference it would make in practice for you. So I'll just throw it out to the 4 of you, and please feel free to chip in. Which recommendations, first of all, which recommendations of those that you heard feels most important to you and why?
Well, I'll start. I think for me, the thing is to have a choice. And I think sort of able people have a choice where they go, what they do, when they do it. Why should we as disabled people be sort of disadvantaged in a way that sort of able-bodied people are. And I was thinking that over the past 50 years, made great strides with sex discrimination, race discrimination, religious discrimination, and I think the final hurdle that we as a society need to cross is disability discrimination. And I think that there's still a lot that can be done, and we need to start as a society to acknowledge disabled people and that we are an essential part of society and that we should be allowed to have a choice and make choices about what we do, where we do it, and when we do it, and not be disadvantaged because of our inability to do certain things.
Lovely, thank you, Thomas. Aldona, Heather and Santana, which of those recommendations really jumps out to you?
I think for me, it's practice, priority, and I'd like to see, some sort of regulation that covers fit for purpose buildings, areas, rest, recovery techniques, and an individual assessment and one-to-one of each participant. I'd like there be some flexibility within every activity to accommodate all. And I would particularly love to see the promotion of disabled managers and coordinators when roles are advertised, and strongly encouraged to apply for those roles. I think it would make a massive impact, and it would also attract more disabled people to attempt to carry out the activity because of the level of understanding.
Lovely. So it what you've just said kind of crosses a few of those recommendations.
Yeah.
But again, it's about being adaptable. It's giving choices. That one-to-one that you talked about, it seemed to be so important to you, Heather, and that's really useful for us to hear.
Yeah, I think like Santana said, it's you only get first impression, and if they're passion and they're willing to listen, willing to accommodate, you carry on with your to complete the exercise or sport. If you get a negative response, you go home and that's it. You don't attempt to try again. It can be very depressing and demotivating. So you get that one chance, and it's so important.
I think you've illustrated that really beautifully. Thank you, Heather, the importance of that. Building that confidence. Aldona or Santana, is there any one recommendation that jumped out to you?
So I'm struggling to choose between them because they're all important. But I think if I was going to choose one, it would be ensure inclusive practice, because it seems to me, I feel like the onus is on me to prove my disability to people, and that's quite uncomfortable. I've been at sessions where people have said, "What's your disability?" because it's not always obvious from looking at me, and then people start asking difficult questions. I don't feel like the onus should be on me to prove my disability to people.
Yeah. It's like it's being interrogated, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's kind of with wearing down that confidence, making you feel you have to justify it. Doesn't create a sense of belonging.
No.
Okay, lovely, thank you. Santana, anything that you'd like to say? Any recommendations that jump out to you?
Yeah, inclusion is obviously super important, but I think we just need to consider the cost. It's not just the clients, it's the providers as well. Is this something that they can keep offering? And support needs to be on so many levels to continue. Thank you.
And the support is on so many levels, but it's all about speaking to people on a one-to-one basis to find out what your particular support is. I think we heard earlier, and it's just it's interesting to come back to that when we talk about support on so many levels. It's finding out what that particular person needs.
Yeah, not just using that standard health form and then it being filed away. It starts with a conversation and it starts with your own honesty as well. Like, I'm not familiar with this condition. I'm going to do some research. Maybe you could tell me more about it, how it would affect you. It needs to be personal. And then that person has the trust that they can come back to you if there's any issues and changes that need to be made. And it's about that communication between the clients and other instructors and the venues.
And I expect it's about the leaders having the confidence to, if they don't get it right the first time, they reassure the person that they will try their best to make accommodations and to flex it the second time they come along. I guess it's about growing that trust between you, being authentic, working together to create the space that you need to feel confident. And
being honest. Not everyone's going to know about everyone's access needs. How can I learn? How can I improve? Then we can do that as a community.
Lovely. Thank you. I'm really glad that we mentioned that. I think it's important. So I believe everybody's had a chance to say something. Is there anything else that anybody would like to say about the most important recommendation to them before we move on?
Space to rest. And the reminder that maybe I need to check in with myself to rest. And that often helps other people realise that they need to rest. And then we can come back and it will be great and safe.
Good point. Yeah, one that I need to bear in mind too.
We all do, yeah.
Okay. So I think we've had a really clear pitch there about what the important recommendation is and also what difference it makes to you in real life. I think I'd just like to say before we close, if you've got a lot of people here in the audience that work in the sector, we've got leaders in the audience and so on, and people that are really interested in hearing the messages from the report being brought to life. If you could ask the sector to take one message from today's discussion, what would it be? I'll throw that to the four of you.
I would say if you were in that situation, how would you want to be treated? How would you want to be acknowledged? Would you be prepared to tolerate some of the behaviours, attitudes, and feedback and questions that are posed to us as disabled people? Would you be happy to be treated in that way? And I think that's the key thing that I try and reflect back onto people. Is that the way you want to be treated yourself?
That's a really good point. Yeah, thank you, Thomas. Put yourself in people's shoes by speaking to them, having a conversation, creating understanding. Lovely. Okay. Anything else anybody like to say before we move on?
I think I would have an open mind and be prepared to learn. I've said from the time that everyone engaged in this process of providing disabled people any sport or activity, exercise, should be part of some sort of accreditation, trained to the same standard, recognised, and maybe the funding providers out there should offer incentives to, put this training in place, because everything else in life is done to a standard, but disabled sport and exercise isn't. I think we've had a lot of discussions about how things work well in different postcode areas, and it's very unfair that you get treated differently according to where you live. And I think it needs urgent rectification. And I believe the accreditation scheme would, really address that matter.
Okay. It's that postcode lottery again. Yeah. Yeah. And the lottery of turning up somewhere not knowing if there is that understanding. Okay, lovely. Thank you all. I'd it's just so valuable to hear a little snippet of the conversation that we had in the research and to bring that report to life in a very practical way, and to hear the emotion through the report, like through the findings, to get a little bit of that emotion that we don't capture in written form quite so easily. So what comes through clearly to me is it's just genuine accessibility. It's about being welcoming and flexible, creating that sense of belonging, not just having conversations, and not just leave it to disabled people to navigate these barriers alone. Go on that journey with them, learning, constant learning. Just because you've been in the sector for many, many years, they're still learning. They're still learning about how to adapt, how to be flexible, how to be more inclusive and create a sense of belonging for more people. Okay, I will hand over now to Molly and Adam, and thank you again to our research participants. That was Aldona, Heather, Thomas and Santana. Thank you for that.
Catherine, thank you again to everybody. I certainly found that very useful and valuable, and it brought the research findings much more to life through discussion. But we are coming towards the end of the webinar today, so I'm going to give a quick overview of research output that you can look at and that's upcoming. So currently available on our website, we've got the full research report, which goes into much more detail of the data and insight and what you've heard today across the surveys and the focus groups. Then there's an executive summary report, which is much shorter, and we have accessible format of an easy read report and a British Sign Language video as well. So that's what's currently available. Then upcoming research releases later this year, we'll have the impairment report, which focuses upon impairment-specific data from the survey. Then we'll be updating the secondary analysis, which combines multiple years of survey data. And then next year is the children and young people version of the annual survey. But for now, to finish our webinar, I'm going to hand back to Adam to close. Yeah, over to Adam.
Thanks, Molly. Just a couple of things from me. First, as you see on the screen there, and I can talk through it, we'd really like anyone that's not yet signed up to be a supporter of our work to sign up to be a supporter. So don't worry, there's no charge, there's no ongoing fees, there's no complicated forms to fill out. It'll take you a couple of minutes, but it really helps us work with you, talk to you, helps us get a collective voice of people trying to do the same thing. And there's significant benefits for you of doing that, whether that's access to more of these for supporters only, significant updates from across the sector, access to particular training courses for us that are accredited by CIMSPA, and opportunities to help us influence policy at a national level, some of the things that Santana talked about. So if you've not signed up yet, please do so. And then last thing, just some real thank yous from me. So I do want to thank all the contributors. So Catherine, a great job of hosting that panel. Aldona, your update in a way was frustrating because the things you shared are solvable problems, but the good thing is that we can definitely help you solve those problems. And I saw in the chats and in the Q&As that people have already offered to help solve some of those issues, and I'll make sure that our team gets in touch with you to make sure that the issues that you've got can be overcome. Heather, I loved your story about the yoga, that light bulb moment, and you pushing for support. You shouldn't need to push for support. It's great you did. I also love that never say never, Heather. Doesn't work when you're called Adam, but the premise of it definitely does. And you flagging representation among the workforce. That's something that's really important to us and that we're working on. Thomas, again, your Pilates story, the no negative commentaries within the class, media, society can definitely learn from that. And I loved it when you said having a disability shouldn't stop you taking part. Absolutely. And your point that choice is critical. Again, that's something that we're really across and trying to change. And your point around disability discrimination needing to be addressed, agree with that completely. And then Santana, when you're talking about, it isn't just about the activity, that's really important. And again, this reflects some of the work that we're doing, and it's in the research. Can people get there? Is it safe? How clear is the information that's been shared? And again, you flag the importance of representation that comes up in the research, and just considering that long-term sustainability of the work and activity is really important. I do want to thank Molly for the way you've led the work and the work you've done today on the call. I also know how difficult it is to listen to yourself back, so well done for sitting through that for that bit, and it worked really well. And then to everyone, thank you for attending. Thank you for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your week. And importantly, if you need anything from us, then let us know. I think we've covered a lot of the Q&As or the questions that have been asked, but if you think of things post this event, please contact us. Thanks all.